come to the right spot. It's another edition of Lewis at Large. 60 minutes of smart talk radio is in your future with guests from all walks of life and all points of view. And now with this week's edition of Lewis at Large, here's your host, Warner Lewis.
Welcome, everybody, to this segment of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, of course, from the old flight deck. And that means some smart talk radios in your future. And this segment, absolutely it is. We're going to be talking to a good one. We're going to be talking to Professor William Beeman. He is a professor of anthropology at the University of Minnesota. He is also the author of The Great Satan versus the Mad Mullahs and how the United States and Iran demonize each other in the past and also currently. Well-traveled, well-respected in numerous circles. Indeed, he is. He's also an actor. He's a singer. Along with everything else, he has spent time teaching at Brown University. As we said earlier, he's also at the University of Minnesota, or he's now at the University of Minnesota, but he's also won awards for his work in the opera, and on and on. And what a stumbling introduction indeed. Professor, how are you, my friend? I'm well, thank you very much. Well, first of all, let's get this out of the way. You were born in Manhattan, Kansas, just up the road.
I was. Those folks at K-State have a friendly relationship with folks down there in Lawrence.
Yes, yes. At times they do. There's no question about it. And then you also, I understand, spend a little bit of time in your youth in Johnson County to our east. That's
right. I grew up in Roland Park.
Okay. All right. Well, good. You must be Shawnee Mission North grad or something or that.
Well, I didn't quite make it that far. We moved to Tulsa after that, and I went to high school in Tulsa.
Okay. Well, I'm curious as to, and we're going to get into your work about the Middle East and about Iran, and also talk a little bit as juxtaposed to Argo, which won Best Picture of the Year this year. But also tell us a little bit about your musical background, because just if nothing else, for interest in this interview.
Well, I'm a linguistic anthropologist, and that means I study the way that language functions in different cultures and societies around the world. And one of the aspects that I've been most interested in is how language creates emotional states in people that listen to it. You know, you can insult somebody and make them cry, or you can tell a joke and make them laugh. And I studied, this was one of the things that I studied actually for my doctoral dissertation. I was studying Persian language in Iran. And then later I decided that it would be interesting to look at theater. And I studied traditional performing arts in Asia and all over the place. And finally, I decided that it was not enough to just be an observer from the outside, that it was really important to understand how communication works from the inside. And I was really too late for participating in almost any of the Asian theater forms that I knew, because you have to start when you're a child. But I did have a singing voice, and so I went back to conservatory and studied to be an opera singer. And then I worked for 3 years in Germany in an opera house. Trying to figure out how it is that opera singers work in order to stir people's emotions, and indeed, opera singers make people cry and they make people laugh. So it was a great odyssey, and I am finishing a book now on my experiences in a German opera house from that standpoint.
Well, if you're interested in communication and interested in theater, they certainly go hand in hand. The relationship between the United States and Iran has been one that has been absolutely characterized by public communication theater, for sure, through the media and otherwise. Why? Let's just start right here. Why is this relationship between these two entities? Why historically has it been such a negative piece? Well, the difficulties between the United States and Iran, of course, started at the time of the Iranian Revolution. The United States had relied on the Shah of Iran as being a friend of the United States during the Cold War to try to keep the Soviet Union out of the Persian Gulf area. In fact, we relied both on Iran and on Saudi Arabia. But the relationship with Iran went sour
during the 1970s, when the Shah started to use really repressive techniques to try to keep down his critics. And the United States was seen as complicit in this. And this played upon an earlier period of time. In 1953, the CIA overthrew the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and actually established the Shah on the throne. So after the Shah was deposed during the 78-79 revolution, the Iranians remained deeply suspicious. They thought that the United States was going to once again try to reinstate the Shah through some kind of machination, some kind of military coup. And when the Shah, who was sick but who hadn't really told anybody that he had cancer, wanted to come to the United States in order to get medical treatment, and when we allowed him in, the revolutionaries were afraid that what was going on was not that he was sick, but rather that he'd gone to the United States in order to stage a coup and eliminate the revolution. So this was the reason why the U.S. Embassy was occupied, and the United States considered this to be a grave insult to us. And the hostages, of course, were held for 444 days. There are people in Washington today who remember that period, and who really will probably never forgive Iran for this insult to our nationality. So the relations soured almost immediately after the hostage crisis, and then they got worse and worse as time went on. What then took place is that the Iranians refused to be either allied with the U.S. or the Soviet Union. They had a slogan that said neither East nor West. And after the Soviet Union disappeared, then it just became a hostility between Iran and the United States. And this has gone on for a very long time. Now, the Iranians have a whole litany of things that the United States has done to them, and starting in 1953 and going through the Shah's regime, where they blame the repression that took place under the Shah, partly on us. Then the Iran-Iraq War, where in the Iran-Iraq War, the United States helped Iraq in resisting Iran by providing intelligence and other things. And then as relations deteriorated, the United States imposed sanctions on Iran, and then during the Bush administration, they were accused of trying to manufacture nuclear weapons, an accusation that, by the way, is completely false. So, do you
still believe that? Do you believe that to be true? And here's what I'm asking: we have had a couple of people on the show in the past year that worked in the United States intelligence community that they're no longer there, but they do in fact believe that the nuclear threat there is still very real.
Well, they may believe it, but our own national intelligence estimate, which has come out regularly since 2003, says every single time it's been issued that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program.
Yeah,
and so the people who are no longer in the intelligence community may tell you that they personally believe this, but that's not what the national intelligence estimate says.
Right.
Nor does the United Nations, the Atomic Energy Agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, say that they have a weapons program, nor does the intelligence community in Israel, nor does the American military, nor does the Israeli military. So nobody is able to demonstrate that Iran actually has a nuclear weapons program. Now, what individuals personally believe, we can't control.
Sure.
But the official statements and the evidence all shows that the program does not exist.
We are, if you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis, here from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio, talking to Professor William Beeman. He is a professor of anthropology at the University of Minnesota. He's also a scholar and author on the Middle East, amongst other subjects. We're talking about, obviously, the United States' relationship with Iran, and also as it juxtaposed to the recent winning of the movie Argo as Best Picture. Let's dive into that right away. Your contention is that the movie, we need to remember, it is not a documentary. It is a Hollywood spin, maybe even approaching a piece of fiction. You were in Iran during the revolution. You know a lot of those people that were portrayed there. Give us, if you would, for those that have not seen the movie, quickly the plot, and then give us your take on that plot.
Well, I don't want to spoil the movie for anybody who hasn't seen it. I'll try.
But in general terms,
I may have to. Anybody who hasn't seen the movie, I would maybe ask you to hold your ears or something so that you don't hear things that you might want to be surprised by in the film. But basically, what happened is that there were the American embassy was occupied by students. Later, they were replaced on a gradual basis by radical individuals who were supporting the Ayatollah Khomeini. And the occupation was supposed to take place and be over in a very short period of time. But over a length of time, it was clear that the occupation was going to be a very long-term process. Now, at the same time that the embassy was occupied, the U.S. consulate, which is in a separate building in a separate place, was not. And 6 individuals from the U.S. consulate who were staffing the consulate realized that they might be in danger as well, and they escaped, and they took refuge in the Canadian embassy. Now, the question was, how are you going to get these officials out of the country, given the fact that the embassy personnel had already been taken hostage by the individuals in the revolution? So a plot was cooked up whereby a Canadian film crew was to come to Iran doing a set location reconnaissance to try to figure out a local film sites for a feature film that they were trying to do. Now, Canada still had diplomatic relations with Iran, and there was no difficulty in Canadians traveling to Iran. They got visas. It was quite easy. So the film crew, which was really an American film crew, got Canadian passports and came to Iran under the guise of being Canadian citizens. Passports were issued for the 6 Americans who were holed up in the Canadian embassy, and eventually the film crew fooled around for a while and took some local shots, and then said, thank you very much. We've had our location visit, and now we're going back to the United States, and we'll get back to you when we want to actually do the real filming. Then they took those 6 Americans out of the embassy under the guise of being part of the film crew and flew off with them. That's basically what happened. Now, what is embellished in the story is heightening the sense of danger that these people were in, and also, in particular, the last third of the film, where the individuals are going to the airport, they're going to get on the plane, and in Hollywood spin fashion, what really was portrayed in the film was that they were in imminent danger all the time, and that at the very last minute, the Iranian officials discovered that they were Americans, or suspected that they were, and they chased the Swiss airplane down the runway in jeeps and military vehicles, trying to shoot out the tires and stop them. And of course, the plane took off, and everybody was a hero. In point of fact, the plot was actually conceived pretty much by the Canadians, by the Canadian ambassador. But in the film, it makes it look like it's entirely the CIA that did this. The CIA kind of went along with the idea, and the hero of the film, played by Ben Affleck, Tony Mendez, he certainly was heroic, but he was only in Iran for about a day and a half, and the film shows him there, much longer, and it shows him concocting the plot and trying to convince the Americans to go along with the plot, when really none of this happened. So it is a really entertaining film. I've just got to tell you, there's nothing wrong with entertainment, but anybody who takes this as history is really very foolish. And it also is the case that there were many other Americans still resident in Iran that were in no danger, and also the Iranians are portrayed almost exclusively in the film as being very dark and very threatening and very menacing.
Right.
And it doesn't paint a very good picture of the Iranian people, who, after all, were trying to throw off a dictator in all of this period of the revolution, and the United States was seen as complicit.
Right. And again, you were living in Iran at the time, were you not?
I was not there for this phase of the material. I had actually left in the spring of 1979.
Okay, but you were there around that era. Of course, we all remember the dramatic inauguration day liftoff of those hostages leaving Iran, which was...
that was about a year later.
I guess, you're right. It was about a year
1980.
later. Yeah, that's right. It was... But I'm curious as to why then, if let's take nuclear weapon development off the table, why, in your opinion, if you talked about one fire starter word, it might be the word Iran, and I'm curious as to why you believe that still is.
Well, as I say, the United States has been pretty much hostile to Iran ever since that period, ever since the hostage crisis, and Iran has been rather defiant against the United States. They have a long history of attempts by Western powers, both Russia in the 19th century and Great Britain in the 19th century, and in contemporary times, the United States and the Soviet Union were trying to dominate them and interfere in their internal affairs. So they've been very skeptical about almost everything that the United States has done, and therefore we just have not enjoyed friendly relations. Then, in addition, during the Bush administration, what happened is that the U.S.-Iranian relations, which were on a rather separate course, became conflated with U.S.-Israeli relations. And after the Bush administration came to power, we got the kind of equation that if you're friendly to Iran, you must be hostile to Israel, or if you're friendly to Israel, you must be hostile to Iran. And even people who talked about doing things like having talks or negotiations with Iran, and we, by the way, haven't had diplomatic relations since 1979. They might be labeled anti-Semitic, which is quite bizarre. So there is a political aspect to this here in the United States, where Iran has become a kind of a whipping boy, kind of a universal boogeyman for U.S. politicians and for other people who would like to use this as a demagogic kind of political lever. And I'd go so far as to say that there's no American politician, either Democrat or Republican, has ever lost a vote by attacking Iran. It's a universally applauded kind of posture for people to take. And given that Iran really doesn't pose any danger to the United States at all, it is also a kind of a cheap move. It's very, very cheap for people to condemn or to attack Iran when there is no actual danger to the United States being promulgated by the Iranians.
All right. Again, if you just joined us, you're talking the Middle East here. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. Our special guest today, Professor William O'Brennan. He's professor and chair of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Minnesota and president of the Middle East section of the American Anthropological Association. He's formerly a professor of anthropology and director of Middle East studies at Brown University as well. And we are talking all things Iran and the United States. Professor Beeman, if we were to wave a wand here, as we do many times on this show, and suddenly made you the head of shuttle diplomacy here, what draws these two parties back from the edge?
The first thing I would do, and I think it's important to listen to the Iranians because they've been asking for this for a long time, is to recognize their rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They were one of the first signatories. And the Non-Proliferation Treaty grants every nation who's a signatory to the treaty the inalienable right to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. there are 19 other nations that are enriching uranium right now. And Iran is the only nation in the world that is being asked to stop enriching uranium. And so the Iranians are rather furious about this. They're saying that they are being targeted. They're being asked to abrogate their treaty rights for no reason that they can that is really plausible. As I pointed out to you earlier, there is no evidence anywhere that Iran has a nuclear weapons program. None. And so the idea that they would be asked to eliminate uranium enrichment, which they're pursuing for peaceful purposes, is anathema to them. They are, and the talks will not start unless the United States formally acknowledges that they have the right to the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and consequently the right to enrich uranium, just like the 19 other nations in the world that don't have weapons but are enriching uranium are doing. So this is number one. That's the very first thing, and the talks will proceed from there. But they have to get over that one stumbling block, and the United States has not been willing to do this.
What about how do you think would the world community in general agree with your assessment?
Well, you mean conventional wisdom,
yeah,
or people who actually know something?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's put it this way. Yeah, just the world.
If you were taking a vote of the person on the street who knows nothing, I'm sure they would say that just as you've told me that they're convinced already that Iran is making nuclear weapons.
Right.
Well, why are they convinced? It's because we had 8 years of Bush administration officials telling us that and condemning their own intelligence estimates. So when the National Intelligence Estimate came out in 2007 and said Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program, President Bush said, "I don't believe it." It's his own intelligence community. And so we have a real problem here. There's a difference between belief and superstition and actual hard fact. And if you look at the hard facts, there is no weapons program. And I defy anybody to provide the hard evidence that actually shows that there is such a thing. You're in Kansas. Your governor doesn't believes that there's a weapons program. I can tell you because he said so.
And he would know. Again, in your most recent work, where you're the premise again, or not the premise, but the exploration of the subject of how these two countries demonize and point fingers and throw rocks at one another. Any reason to think that's going to change?
Well, I should not put all the burden on the United States. It's really not fair because the Iranian politicians have also found lots and lots of ways to demonize the United States and to blame their own shortcomings on the United States as well. I mean, they have a lot of historical precedents for talking about that. Again, starting back with the coup in 1953 and the Iran-Iraq War and the support of the Shah and so forth. But it is kind of disingenuous for Iranian leaders to say our economy is really poor, and the reason is because the United States is trying to destroy us. And they do that on a rather regular basis. But what it means for the United States is that we have both the United States and Iran using each other as excuses for their particular failings. There was a time when the United States was saying things are going badly in Iraq with our U.S. military, and the reason is because the Iranians are sending equipment to try to undermine our military in Iraq. But there was no evidence for that either. But nevertheless, we use that as an excuse. And currently, the Iranian economy is in really bad shape. Well, the U.S. sanctions against Iran certainly contribute to that, but also the economy has been mismanaged. And then the United States occasionally, and probably should with much more force, be condemning the Iranian human rights record, which is really dreadful. Iran has many political prisoners who are incarcerated, perhaps as many as under the Shah. But then the Iranians immediately point to the United States and say, what are you talking about human rights? You have Abu Ghraib, and you have Guantanamo, and you have people being rendered for torture outside of the the United States when it suits your purposes. So, so don't talk to us about human rights. You're just as much of a violator as we are. So each side is throwing mud at the other, and using the other as an important kind of excuse for not cleaning up their own act.
Well, I have every reason to believe that the mudslinging will probably continue for a while. It's gone on for decades, and that's unfortunate, but it sort of is the way it is. But we appreciate the insight that you have given us today. And again,
let me say one final thing, and that is that the United States never thought that we would have a rapprochement with China. And when President Nixon went to China and opened up China for the United States, the entire world changed. And the same thing could happen with Iran. If we had a breakthrough to Iran, and it might be as simple as saying to the Iranians, "Yeah, you have the right to enrich uranium."
Right.
Just those few words, the world would change. The economy of the world would immediately get a boost. There would be a reduction of tension in the Middle East. It would be a massive, massive change in the world situation. But somebody has to have the courage to take the first step.
How, Professor Beeman, as we close out here, how can people find out more about the work and the writings that you've done, particularly The Great Satan?
Well, The Great Satan versus the Mad Mullahs is published by the University of Chicago Press. There's a hardback copy there's a hardback version that's a little bit earlier in time, 2005. There is a new book out by Flint and Hilary Mann Leverett. I don't have the title right now. But it is also details the U.S.-Iranian relations. And I ask everybody to look up online, look up the work of Gareth Porter. Gareth Porter is a very important historian and independent journalist who's been covering the Iranian situation, particularly the nuclear situation, very extensively. It's very hard for these individuals, the Leveretts or myself or Gareth Porter, to get through to the mainstream media because of the conventional wisdom that I was talking about. But these are people who really know what is going on. They're serious, investigative people with real hard facts, and I encourage everyone who wants to know more to probably not seek out the daily paper, but actually do some investigation on the internet.
Good. Well, listen, hey, thank you so much for your time and the insights. Really appreciate it.
You're most welcome.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.